When it comes to the American church and what I believe about how they combat or disciple about sexual abuse or sexual harassment, I think one of the main things is, in my personal experience, I haven't seen a lot of combating. In my experience, I haven't seen a lot of discipling about these specific topics. And I believe that a lot of times there is some things that are done on the back end, but not necessarily on the front end. I think the front end of that looks like just, first of all, getting into the young minds and not allowing just like public schools or social media or all these different things to hit our kids and our young adults first before we do as the body of Christ. I think that we need to be training the young minds on what is appropriate and what isn't appropriate. I think that it's important for us to be able to be living our lives openly as believers so that when something is being done secretly or in the dark, it causes a spark in a young adult's mind or a child's mind that, hey, this isn't really right. But sometimes as believers, we're not living as openly as we should when it comes to our personal lives, when it comes to that's my business, or when it comes to this is how I live here at church, but this is how I live at home. And so when we start seeing lives that are lived out that way, it doesn't really help when it comes to children or young adults or even anybody who is exposed to being a victim of sexual abuse or sexual harassment. Yeah, when it comes to the negative influences, when I think about possibilities with public school or social media or things like that, I think for one thing, sometimes things are exposed to our children, especially our kids and our youth at certain ages that it's just not the time for them to be exposed to that. So it causes just curiosity in their minds, and they're drifting from just being children, and now they're curious about things that they probably wouldn't be curious about if they weren't necessarily exposed to those things so early. I also think that in the public schools, especially, there's an influence of ways that they would say are right and are okay that aren't necessarily okay for us as biblical believers. I'm not saying that the public school is all bad as far as when it comes to that, but I think that before the public school, it's not a matter of it always being negative, but before the public school gets to our kids, I think that we should get to our kids so that we can also have a biblical influence when we're speaking. When they are exposed to these things, school, social media, whatever the case may be, it doesn't have this biblical influence behind it. And so I think the advantage we have is to have the biblical influence behind the things that we're explaining, the things that we're talking about. One of the fears I had as soon as I found out I was having a daughter was like, God, I don't want anything that happened to me to happen to her. And one of the beautiful benefits that my daughter has is growing up in a two-parent home. I think there's such power when it comes to having a dad and having a dad be the one to first call you beautiful, or having a dad to validate, her as a young woman. I think that certain things in certain situations don't always pop off so easily. And so when it comes to us kind of fleshing out how we'll talk about that, I think that we're still processing that. I think that we're thinking through like, okay, what is the best way? And times are changing so quick and so fast. So sometimes you gotta have these conversations a little bit earlier than what you thought you would probably have, like as opposed to when I was growing up. And so I think we're just really praying for God to lead us, but we're consistently being mindful and consistently praying about the Lord helping us when it comes to that topic of discussion, because it may be a time frame when we didn't think that we would have to have that conversation yet, but we may have to. So we're really praying about that. And also too, I think that not completely hiding her from the reality of truth and the reality of the terrible, harsh, evil world that we live in, and still being able to push her to Christ in that, to not live in a false reality that, mommy and daddy can do some protecting, but at the same time, there are some things that we can inform her about so that she isn't in certain situations as well. I think that for my experience, I had a single parent home, and my mom was just working as hard as she could to put food on the table. And so, you trust this person to babysit, and you trust that person to babysit. But I think where the difference is here is, again, like, it's a totally different thing having a two-parent home. It's a totally different thing when she's like just gonna be with her dad, as opposed to like, let's just do this because we're trying our hardest to make something happen. And so again, that's what I mean by that biblical influence, the beauty of doing things God's way, the beauty of being able to raise a child in a two-parent home home, the benefit of that is just totally different. And not that God can't bless single mothers, because he blessed us as well. But there are just certain benefits that come with that. And so I'm grateful for that extremely. But I do also think that it's a matter of consistent prayer as well. Consistent prayer, not just like consistent prayer. I am someone who I think was a very outgoing person, and my mom, just like I said, was just, she ended up being married to my father, who, she was a believer, but he was kind of just in and out, and consistently in and out. And when it came to her leaving us with family members, she ended up leaving with a family member that she trusted. And unfortunately, that became a sexually abusive situation for a pretty long period of time, not just like a matter of a month or 2 months, but over a long period of time. Unfortunately, the other situation that happened with my father, he was just an alcoholic drug addict, and I don't even know if he really realized completely and fully what he was doing. And so because of him not knowing what was happening with the family member, the time frame in which these things were being done to me actually overlapped. So things were happening in my home with my grandmother, but also in, visiting with my dad. These things are happening as well in the same age frame. So it really did a number on me personally. And when I say personally, I mean more so mentally. And I think that those are thoughts that I could never get away from. And there was a constant battle consistently in my mind. And I definitely changed me forever, for sure. Again, in my personal experience, I don't think that there was a preparedness, if I could say, for these type of matters. They weren't really talked about. They weren't really brought up. And so I find that when it comes to loving those who have been through these situations, it requires a lot more than is normally expected, probably in your own personal mind. You may have to walk with somebody for years, but are you willing to give that commitment of your life to that person to walk with them? Because a lot of times it's like, okay, you kind of feel like, and I've heard people tell me this, like, you're not over it yet, or, hasn't God done this for you, and hasn't God done that for you? Like that has anything to do with what I'm dealing with personally. I also believe that I know culturally a lot that wasn't paid attention to was the psychological effects that it has on you. And I came up in a church where it was just like, pray about it, spend around 3 times and tell the devil it's over, or, those type of things. And, I'm just now like at a place where I had to start going to biblical counseling because that stuff still carried over. I thought it was over, and then I was like, oh, this is gonna be great. And then I got into a relationship, and it affected the way I was willing to commit in the relationship, because I didn't even want to commit because I had all these issues with trust. And even though my husband is not the enemy, he carries the exterior shell of the person that did those things to me. So now there's a struggle with intimacy even in marriage, and it's having a crazy effect. So now it's like, it wasn't until my back was against the wall, and I was like, I think I may need help more than just reading my Bible. And like, I probably would have never said that before, because again, like culturally it's just like, nah, you good. God can heal you. Do you not believe God can heal you? And it's just like, it's so interesting, because when it comes to issues with, like, let's say my blood pressure, or when it comes to even issues that I had when I was pregnant with my daughter, there's no doubt in like, you need to go to the doctor, you need to go to the hospital, but when it comes to things regarding the mind, it's like, oh, you don't have enough faith. It's just like, no, like, they're in the same way that someone is gifted to help me with my physical needs, there's someone also gifted in the area of helping with my mental needs as well. And I think that sometimes it's a really hard thing to admit, because sometimes you're made to feel guilty for needing psychological help. And I love biblical counseling because, again, there's the influence of scripture along with the tools that you need to help you start journeying on a path that you probably never even thought was attainable. I just remember when I sat down with my counselor and she spoke to me about hope, I realized that I believed God to be who he was for other people. I believed God for sure that he would answer this person's prayer and that person's prayer. But when it came to me, I realized I didn't believe. I just was like, well, this is the life I'm called to. I've been called to a life of struggle. I've been called to a life of this. It's just like, wait a minute. Like, I can experience joy. I can experience peace. And I think for the first time, I had hope in a long time. And I was just like, wow, I haven't hoped in a long time. I would really love for the church to engage more with counseling and counselors and making the body understand that it's okay to need help. The Bible speaks to me regarding my issue, and I think sometimes when we hear about sexual abuse, like we run to like the Tamar situation in the Bible, and we run to like, well, this happened and this was rape, and it's like that's not the only thing that applies. And so especially the Psalms and just reading through the Psalms, because there's an intimacy of really crying out and admitting that you're weak, admitting that you're in desperate need. And so that's what I really, really have loved, is being able to see my personal pride and how I haven't been willing to admit that I am in extreme need. And I think that's beautiful now, because there is a dependency on the Lord that I am now walking in, whereas prior to this, I just was like, I can handle it. I can do it. It's not that big of a deal. And I think the danger in that, especially being married, is not understanding how much it's affecting those that love you and are around you. So with my husband, it was affecting him because he is getting the backlash and the all the things that I just didn't get a chance to express to those people that did these things to me. He's now receiving, and understanding through counseling that I have existed a lot in my emotions. I feel, and that's like a lot of the times me and my husband's conversations, I feel like you're trying to come for me. I feel like you just don't really love me. I feel like you don't understand. I feel like you don't want to understand. I feel like you don't even want me to succeed. It's like, I feel. In all reality, I know that is not the truth. I know that my husband genuinely loves me. I know that his desire is to try to understand me as best as possible when it comes to these situations. Well, he doesn't want to feel like the enemy, but that's who he's made to feel like. And even with my daughter, I don't want to even unintentionally pass things onto her, unintentionally pass along fear, unintentionally pass along just these ways in which I communicate with her that are still stemming from the hurt and pain from the things I've already dealt with. So I think that those are ways in which counseling has really, really been helping me. And I say been helping because it's still a process. My favorite part about Lamentations 3 is this description of all this suffering, and when it gets to verse 21, it says, "For this I recall, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord is like never ceasing." And sometimes there are many times where I felt like just completely forgotten in this area of my life by the Lord. Not completely forgotten as his child, but completely forgotten. Or that I had done so many things that I'm just completely undeserving of that. So really knowing that in your mind, like, okay, the Lord loves me. But to know that I can have hope regardless of all the things that have transpired. Remember, I started by saying, like, I had just completely lost hope. And hope is a powerful thing because it speaks to my level of faith. It speaks to my ultimate belief in God. It speaks to me in my heart, like, do I really believe God to be who he says he is? Do I believe that he's capable? And so when it came to even just my counselor saying, like, hey, I believe you can get to all these places you desire to be personally and in your marriage and in your intimacy in your marriage. And I laughed because I was like, no, like, I think this is just going to be my life. But Lamentations 3 really helped me because it helped me to understand that the things that I'm recalling to mind have not been about this steadfast love of the Lord. I'm recalling all the things that are bad. I'm recalling all the things that I want to stay away from. I'm recalling all the things that transpired, and I'm replaying them in my mind and having these really low lows. So what am I recalling to mind? And when I got to that point and understood, like, hey, I need to be recalling to my mind that there's this love that the Lord has for me that is never, ever, ever, ever ceasing. And that was just like a big turnaround for me, a big, big turnaround. And it amped me up in a way that I hadn't been amped in a long time. Because if you read Lamentations 3 and you're reading through all these verses, you're like, well, this is just a lot. When is the good part coming? So I believe it to be so beautiful, and believe God to be so amazing, and just even the beauty of supplying my needs through the counseling. And I want to encourage just anybody who has been through those things. When I say those things, I mean sexual abuse or sexual harassment, and know that it's still affecting you in your heart and in your mind. Don't be afraid to seek out the help, regardless of what you have or haven't been exposed to when it comes to culture. Because I can say, even for just my culture, it's not a thing that's normal. It's becoming more normal, but it's not. It hasn't been a thing. So don't feel guilty because you need help. I think we all need help in some type of way, and I believe that the Lord truly ordered my steps when He led me to be able to be exposed to biblical counseling in that way. Yeah, the church can be a light as opposed to being a hypocrite in this Me Too era, but not allowing the world to show us up when it comes to help. Don't be afraid to get your hands dirty, and don't be afraid to do the hard work, and don't be afraid to commit. And I think that's the biggest part, is really committing. A lot of times, and even with those who are probably a part of Legacy, because Legacy is been about discipleship, you know that discipleship doesn't mean just like, okay, we've done this for 5 months now, we should be good, or we've done this for 8 months now, we should be good. It is a commitment, and I think sometimes we're committed to time frames and not committed to lives, and not committed to whatever it takes. So I think that the way that we can be the light is, for one, being on the front end to combat it, and by having conversations, healthy conversations about those things, and making resources that are available, making resources be available for anyone who has gone through these issues. And also being willing to be advocates when it comes to that. Not just, there's so many different things that everybody deals with, and not feeling like you have to form this whole full personal ministry, but understanding that it can be done one-on-one. It could be done, you know what I'm saying, with 1 people, with 3 people. I think it more so is about loving your neighbor, and just like Philippians 2 talks about, esteeming others higher than ourselves, and being willing to sacrifice and make the commitment to do life with one another. Because again, these aren't issues and topics that people are just going to come out and spill out to you. Like, oh yeah, by the way, I was being raped by my dad since I was 5 until I was 12. And no, nobody just ups and has those conversations. These conversations are had by someone investing in someone else's life, and them learning that you genuinely love them. And that is done with time and patience and commitment, and showing up to support whatever that person does, and just being there and being available. Once those steps are being taken, and a trust is being built, then people would begin to open up. But I think sometimes we just want to just jump right to the issue and expect people to just, so that's a real true way I believe we can be a light, and not be so concerned with numbers when it comes to just this movement. The movement is, hey, like, do life with somebody. Don't be concerned about trying to just, I hear people say, it's like, oh, we're going to turn the world upside down. Like, man, how about you just help with one person's life first? And we can see what the Lord does with that.